following is my interview with Stephen Davis, Associate Professor of Theater Arts at Centenary University, which took place December 6th, 2023. So I was just curious to start. I was wondering, generally, how did the COVID-19 pandemic impact the day-to-day operations and activities within the Theater Arts Department at Centenary, including classes and rehearsals?
The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the student population was extensive because you're dealing with performance and you're dealing with the fact that in order to have our students be able to have like their thesis or something, a lot of those were canceled. We had a student who had a dance concert for their senior thesis that they had worked a lot on, and that was actually going to show later in March, at the end of March that year. And so instead of being able to have a finished product that they would be able to refer to, a lot of what they had to write for their thesis was, this is what I was planning on doing, this is what I had hoped to do, this is what I had already choreographed. So that was very challenging. The one thing that I would say about the additional impact that it had on things is that it had a lasting impact on our ability to, just going to let that ring and then I'll be able to answer this question a bit more, but it will distract me a little bit. Okay, so that's done. So it had a lasting impact because we had to adapt the ways in which we were able to present theater. Mm-hmm. So for many of, like, we did dance concerts out on the lawn. We did performances. Professor Angelini Lidd did a lot of vocal performances where we were able to socially distance and be able to be outside. So a lot of the practices that needed to happen, our students became COVID-informed agents. I forget the actual term. In Actors Equity, you have students who basically go into and are able to be COVID officers so that they're able to do all the protocols and checks for performers to be able to do the performances. What this did is it actually put us ahead of the curve because when things opened back up, our students were prepared to deal with this. They had already done temperature checks. They had already dealt with social distancing. They had already administered COVID tests. They had done all the protocols that were necessary to keep everybody safe. And we were able to do our production of Christmas Carol with the ability to have our actors ready to go and be able to present plays both here and at Fellowship Village, a retirement community. I was actually in the production myself because we were doing 2 COVID tests per week as per equity standards, and we were able to do those on campus here. Another area that it affected me with my classes is my theatrical makeup class. I had to film a lot of my classes. I had to do Facebook Live lectures to be able to give them the skills and adapt and change course content on the fly to be able to have it. So I was lecturing in front of my laptop. I was doing a lot of different work that way. And what this did is it initiated a concern I had that this material needed to be more readily available. So after the semester ended in May and June, I shot all of my lectures and I filmed them, and I was able to edit them down, and I've used those lectures ever since because it's succinct, direct, it's exactly what I want to say, and so that adaptation served a great purpose in terms of course content that holds true to this day. It's the silver lining of what had to happen in order to be able to move forward with this. And what I'm finding now in teaching my classes, the students get to reference those videos as well as getting the information from me directly when they're taking that theatrical makeup class, which has been a great benefit for workshops that I do as well as teaching classes.
So you have for all the classes you teach, you have everything recorded?
For that specific class,
because
I crafted I actually went in and did a 3-camera shoot and edited the whole thing down, and took lectures that normally would be like an hour-long lecture, and was able to pare them down with time-lapse photography to 20 minutes.
Wow.
And that made it much more beneficial for the student, the end user, because they're able to, if they don't get something, I can say, oh, look at that video again.
Right,
Look at the intro video about shading, and spend a little bit more time on that. But I can also have the lecture in person so that I can answer questions as well. So it just has been a great benefit.
Yeah. Do you recall any specific innovative strategies that you or your colleagues came up with to try to adapt quickly to the challenges posed by the pandemic, while trying to maintain a very high quality education in theater arts?
Well, the first thing that happened is I went ahead and just paid for Zoom. Even though we as a department did not have access to Zoom, the great thing about Zoom is you're able to see all of your students in one screen, as opposed to Teams where you're only able to see like 3 people. So I went ahead and made the investment for the benefit of my class to have that, and I've paid for it ever since. I find that my production meetings, all of the different things when people, because we're still having people deal with COVID.
Do you still run hybrid? Do you still run?
I've made that as an option.
Right.
I had a student last year they had to actually move to back to Oregon, pardon me. They had to move back to Oregon mid-semester, and were asking if they could still take my theater appreciation class. And I already had the Zoom link set up for the course, and so I was able to adapt. And it's that adaptability that I take from that time period, so that we can still be in service of the student and still help the student to learn in the best way possible, no matter what the modality. So I have taught that class as a high flex class. I prefer the interaction face to face.
Of course, yeah.
I think it's a much more engaging prospect. I've too often looked at a screen and wondered where the students were, as I see different images flashing all over their face, and they're paying attention to some video rather than anything I'm saying.
Well, yeah.
So these are some things that, but to me, I want to be able to interact, and I want to be able to talk and reach out to the student in the best way possible. So that Zoom innovation was good. The videos that I did for my class, that was another innovation. But when it came down to it, it's hard in theater, when we're doing presentations face to face, to substitute for that. So, when it comes to an acting class, we found ways to social distance, we found ways to adapt. But I think the biggest issue was some of the trauma that was induced by the pandemic, that made the kind of interaction that is required for theater much more tentative.
Right.
And so we're having to make certain adjustments in terms of the psychology of our students to make them more comfortable. And this is the year that I finally feel like we're getting back. It's 2023. And so it's taken this long for us to get back to a level of commitment where there is not the anxiety and fear that's motivating actions.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you think the pandemic influenced the collaborative and interactive aspects of Centenary Theater, like tryouts, rehearsals? Were there any permanent changes or lessons learned in this regard?
I think that, as I'd mentioned before, when it comes to the interactions of our students, the in terms of auditions and whatnot, I do think that we had to adjust our practices so that there was a social distancing that was happening between the performer and those of us who were behind the table in audition. We had to get more of a separation that would occur between our performers and actors. There had to be an understanding of that, and we were able to adapt that way. We still did shows. I directed Sweat, Lynn Nottage's Sweat, and we actually, there's an innovation. There's a fight scene in Sweat that the actors have to do this repetition. They have to get physically engaged with one another. And what we did is the actors, when they were on stage, would not wear a mask, but as soon as they left the stage, they would put a mask on. And because of stage combat, you're dealing with aspirates right in people's faces. I shot the fight scene on film and edited it, and we showed it and projected that scene on a screen so that the actors wouldn't have to do that in repetition, being in such close proximity to one another. So that was a big innovation that had to happen. Yeah. And I have a YouTube version of it that I'd be happy to send you.
Yeah,
if you'd
that's
like to
incredible.
See it.
Oh, wow.
But we had to do that. I felt that was a necessary means of making an adjustment, because that had to happen in order for me to feel that I was taking care of my actors and that they were safe. And the number one rule, the golden rule, is do no harm. So we want to make sure that we're prepared. You know, in one instance, I had actors acting alongside, and I asked them not to seat the audience in these two chairs, and a group of people who were seeing the show got up and left, and I spoke with them during the intermission. I said, well, we were not supposed to seat people there because of the actors. And they said, you know, the woman who was at the theater, I felt heartbroken because she said, I just came back from dealing with cancer, and I felt that my proximity to those actors and them projecting was putting me at risk. And I was like, I am so sorry that you felt uncomfortable and felt like you had to leave. And I made aware that I was like, I take full responsibility as the director, that I staged them there, and I did ask them not to seat people there, but the theater was full in terms of social distancing, and I apologize that that's where you sat. But these are the trials and errors that we deal with in terms of this pandemic, and the thought that I would hurt somebody and jeopardize their health was horrifying to me. You know, I still have the screens that we used to wear when we were in rehearsal to kind of make sure that we were able to do this stuff. And I gave it up to the actors. I said, if you feel comfortable taking your mask off while you're acting with another person on stage, then you can do that. And we followed all protocols of COVID, to make sure that everybody was safe.
You said earlier you tested twice a week?
Twice a week.
Wow.
And that's the equity protocol. So
what happened if a student tested positive?
Then they had to follow all the protocols and be sequestered and everything like that. We were lucky in terms of the production of Christmas Carol that we did not have anyone test positive during the course of the run. Mm-hmm. We did have an actor who was sick, but they tested negative, and it was just a cold. But we had the tests that showed that they were negative. Right. And
were there understudies, or
we did have understudies,
sure.
Students who were understudies who would be able to fill in, and that's also a great lesson for the students because they're able to understudy the roles that they're performing, and I think that is just a great opportunity to learn from professionals as you're doing a professional production.
Absolutely. I'll just wrap up here. Do you think that there are any long-term effects of the pandemic that you think like these lessons or experiences will forever be etched in the curriculum? Is there anything that you think, is there anything that changed with the pandemic that you think will be forever integrated into the theater program? Or do you think it'll ever go back to what it once was?
I have hope that we're able to return to a time where we're able to move forward with the education of our students in a manner that allows for a greater interaction. I would say this when it comes to your question about the lasting impacts of COVID-19. I went back and started receiving training with the IDC, Intimacy Directors and Coordinators. I received level 1 and 2 training with them due to my desire to have a better, more consensual relationship with the students in terms of whatever we did, there's consent to action. And to me, when you look at Intimacy Directors and Coordinators, a national organization that is focused on, through the Me Too movement, which really was enhanced during the COVID pandemic, that those practices of consent, I'm walking into rehearsal for Romeo and Juliet right now, and the consent-based work that I'm requiring for any physical contact that is made is something that I feel has had a lasting impact on me. I'm a fight choreographer. I have my own business, Cause and Effects, which goes out into schools and does work with students. And to me, when I'm having physical interaction with students, I'm much more clear about the ways in which I articulate what it is that I'm asking. The other thing that's been part of this with this kind of element that COVID-19, the Me Too movement, George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, all these different things that came out. The unrest is not just COVID-19. Mm-hmm. The unrest is and brought to bear so many different subject matters that I think that I could not and cannot just put blinders on and think that I can return back to the way things were. In fact, I think that I'm a better professor because I want to grow, I want to learn. I'm not satisfied with doing things the way that I used to do them, because I think that there's always a way that we can benefit ourselves and be better at what we do. So for me, the lasting impact is the self-reflection of that I can be a better professor, that I can do things to make people feel safe, and deal with issues in these plays that are deep and righteous and powerful and difficult in a manner that protects the individual. And so I'm very pleased with the training that I've taken on, and additional workshops that I've taken on to better educate myself. That education is helping my students to learn better. I'm hoping to create a much more inclusive relationship with all of my students. I've been training for a marathon for quite a while now. I'm going to be doing it in January at Disney, and I have 2 new hips, so I'm going to be walking it. And every morning I listen to books, and since May I've listened to almost 50 books audio-wise, some of them more than once. And I'm right now listening to How to Make Friends and Influence People. I've listened to the Dr. Brene Brown's work. I've listened to all these books to try to make sure that the first thing that goes into my cup in the morning, other than the cup of coffee that I drink, is something that is going to make me look at the world better. And that, to me, is the largest transformation that I see within myself. I can't ask my students to change and look at the world from a better place and reflect upon COVID-19 and all the other issues that came from that time period without being better myself. How do we lead? We lead by example. And to me, I have to lead by example. I have to be better at articulations of pronouns. I have to be better at everything so that we can create an environment that is inclusive to the struggles that many students had during this pandemic, that has lasting trauma towards them. But we have to still challenge them to get beyond being a victim. I'm not interested in educating victims. I'm interested in empowering individuals to see their place in this society and to be able to move forward, having learned from the past, so that we can move forward to a brighter future. And that's really what I'm aiming for. I am not satisfied with being passive in this time period.